So, yeah, typically Linda and I get our they want to ask it.
Couple of minutes.
I'll email you your release.
So
It
that's
was,
the thing
that's
about
how you get the tracking.
the weird thing about Strata is what the
Say
other
what?
if they're talking.
Oh, yes, thank you.
I didn't get your email.
Well, I can always print it, sign it, and then email that. Good evening. I'd like to bring this Merritt City Council meeting held on June 8th, 2021 to order. And I assume there are no late items. And is there any public input? No?
No, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. 4.1, I need a mover that the minutes of the regular council meeting held on May 25th, 2021 be adopted. Fair and
Second.
Christopherson, second. Any errors or omissions? All in favor? Opposed? None carried. Public hearing, there is a public hearing regarding 2320 Hamilton Hill. And I'm assuming staff are going to read these out so the public has access to the information. Mr. Lewis?
Thank you, Your Worship. My apologies. I just realised in the last few minutes that we normally provide you more guidance on how the hearing is going to be run. So this obviously is the public hearing about 2320 Hamilton Hill Road, which received 2 readings at a prior meeting of council and was subsequently advertised in accordance with the city's bylaws and the Local Government Act for a public hearing requesting public submissions. I think there were 4 public submissions that were received. One of them is a video submission, which I suggest we take at the end. And there were 3 written submissions, which, as is Merritt's current procedure with these entirely written hearings, or not necessarily written, we have a video hearing. But for all the written submissions, staff are typically reading these out, so we propose doing that now. So,
Right after we hear the report from Doc.
yeah, right after we hear the report from Doc.
Thank you. Mr. MacArthur.
Thank you,
Staff
Your Worship.
report.
So as mentioned, this application is pertaining to the property at 2320 Hamilton Hill Road, which is one of two proposed Gateway 286 developments. The applicant is proposing to amend the OCP to change the land use designation of the subject property from future development to comprehensive residential commercial. And comprehensive residential commercial is a land use designation in our OCP that is the equivalent OCP designation to the comprehensive development zone in our zoning bylaw. So it allows for pre-planned master plan communities. The OCP would also be amended to remove the reference to 3 stories to facilitate the proposed hotel. The official community plan generally supports the proposed development. Section 5.4.6 of the OCP outlines policy direction for establishing development at Gateway 286, including commercial and medium density residential. The area is also within the Highway Corridor Gateway development permit area, which encourages multi-story buildings and mixed-use commercial in that area. With regard to the zoning bylaw, the applicant is also proposing to amend zoning bylaw 2284 to change the zoning of the property from large parcel residential, R1A, and agricultural, AR1, to comprehensive development, CD2. And I should note that although a portion of the property is currently zoned for agricultural, it is not in the ALR, so there's no agricultural land reserve exclusion that's required. The applicant has created a new comprehensive development zone, which is in the package, the report package for council as attachment E. And unlike normal or regular rezoning applications involving zoning changes, comprehensive development policies are specific to the proposed development. So this enables council to consider aspects of the proposed development that would normally be considered at later stages of development. So that's why you'll see quite a lot of information in this report from staff with regard to infrastructure and other necessary requirements for completion of the development. With respect to other city plans, the housing needs report indicates that there's a need for more housing options within the community, especially for seniors. And of note, the developer's sales strategy, we're told, is including marketing towards seniors. And I believe that will be in the presentation from the developer shortly. The active transportation plan also identifies this area as a potential future active transportation or bikeway along Hamilton Hill Road, as well as into the development itself. And the form or exact style of pathway that's developed would be determined at subdivision stage. With regard to the design of the development, the developer has provided a package of information as well, which is attached as attachment F, and this includes information about the character of the neighborhood and what they're trying to achieve. In short, the proposed development includes up to a maximum of 450 residential units, which would be a mixture of single-family, duplex, townhomes, and potentially some apartments, as well as a 100-room hotel. And the developer is planning to have a build-out time of about 20 years for that. As mentioned, the proposed development is one half of the planned Gateway 286 development area. The former visitor center site west of this subject property is slated for commercial development, which would be presented to council at a future date. The Gateway 286 developments would necessitate expenditures for infrastructure and also potentially for fire service. The applicants provided a local area service petition to the city, and council gave 3 readings to the local area service bylaw earlier this spring. The proposed cost of works identified in that LAS service petition is roughly $7.554 million. which would be borrowed by the city and repaid by way of a local area service fee on the Gateway 286 property taxes. The city received statutory approval from the Inspector of Municipalities on May 25th for the borrowing up to that $7.554 million. Subsequently, the city has, between the last time we were here in front of council for second reading of the proposed bylaws and now, the city contracted WSP to complete an engineering review to determine whether the local area service works as well as any required downstream works, full costing of what this would look like for infrastructure requirements. And based on WSP's analysis, there are several items of which council should be aware. Due to recent increase in building material costs as a result of the COVID-19 induced supply chain issues, as well as the development demand that's happened over the last year, WSP estimates that the local area service works could end up costing 30 or 40% more. We won't know exact costs until those are tendered, of course, but it's something to be aware of. And city staff discussed these costs with the developer at a meeting recently, and the two Gateway 286 applicants, Applin Martin and True Consulting, both agreed that overages related to the local area service would be borne by the developers, and a formal agreement to that effect, along with a security or bond, would need to be in place prior to commencement of the works. WSP has also identified approximately $13.2 million in additional off-site works, primarily sanitary sewer upgrades and then the associated works with that. So cut and cover of the road, improvements to things like stormwater and sidewalk install after replacing the road, etc. And of that $13.2 million, estimated $4.3 million is directly attributable to the Gateway 286 developments, and likely wouldn't be required unless these developments went forward. So again, that's mostly around sanitary sewer upgrades that would be required, and the staff report details that in some length with maps, etc., so that council and residents can see what we're looking at there. Ideally, these off-site costs would be fully funded through DCC contributions after an update to the DCC bylaw. The current DCC bylaw doesn't include any projects related to Gateway 286 or the necessary improvements, but staff are planning to update the DCC's bylaw in the near future. We were hoping to wait back on a grant application that's in that council approved to go forward for funding to help with consultant costs of updating that bylaw, as well as adopting the OCP to have that in place before we start with the DCC's bylaw update. But it may be prudent to begin update of that bylaw earlier than scheduled because of these developments necessitating that. Having said that, if the applicant is ready to proceed with the developments prior to a new DCC's bylaw being in place with identified projects related to the infrastructure that's needed to be upgraded, staff would recommend entering into a cost-sharing agreement with the applicant, and that would be presented to council for review prior to moving forward with the actual works. Such an agreement would ensure that the infrastructure upgrades are fairly borne by the applicant. In addition to potential infrastructure improvements, fire coverage or fire service rather needs to be considered. As the subject property is within city boundaries, the Merritt Fire Department would provide fire service to the property, and cost of such service would be paid out of our property taxes. Given the distance from the current or existing fire hall, response times to that area, though, would be longer than in other areas of the community. Additionally, staff are under the impression or have been sort of informed that A lower protection classification from fire underwriters would likely occur should there not be a fire service provided, and so that would potentially lead to higher insurance premiums for the developers. So this is if a new fire hall isn't built. So if the plan is to provide increased fire service to the area, a new fire hall would need to be constructed in the southeast of the community, and whether that would be in Diamondvale or at the Gateway 286 area would need to be determined at a later date. That would involve land acquisition, of course, as well as the construction of the fire hall, fire truck purchases. Probably a pumper truck could be used in the short term, and then a ladder truck as the hotel came online, as the proposed hotel is not planned until the second 10-year phase of the build-out. And those costs are outlined in the staff report as well. So there's sort of two options there. One is a fire hall, and the other is to provide the existing service and likely higher insurance premiums for the property owners of the Gateway 226 area. Ordinarily, developers are not required to pay for construction of fire hall infrastructure, but in this circumstance, because a lot of that necessity for fire service would be as a result of these developments, it may be prudent, or it may be a good idea to have the developers paying a portion of that, and that would have to be negotiated, of course, with the developers. Other than the infrastructure servicing and the fire service, there's several other items of note. The Goaty Creek Trail Network, of course, is quite valued by locals and visitors alike. And so maintaining access to those trailheads, as well as connectivity between the trailheads and the planned active transportation routes in the area would be really important. The Merritt Mountain Biking Association has had conversations with the city and as well as the developers around this, and they have indicated that with new grant funding that they're looking to build additional trails in the area. So staff have asked that both of the Gateway 226 developers work with the Merritt Mountain Biking Association to facilitate that construction work. City staff have also recently met with BC Transit to begin discussions on an update to the service review report, which was last updated by BC Transit in 2016. One of the items staff requested for consideration is the implementation of the proposed 5th bus route, which is provided in the staff report, it's detailed in the 2016 service review by BC Transit as a potential future route, and that would potentially service both Gateway 226 and Coldwater Reserve. So those negotiations with BC Transit are ongoing, and it'll likely take some time before that service review is completed, likely not until early next year. The developer is also conducting a traffic impact assessment with input from both the city and MOTI. And staff have another meeting with MOTI later this week to discuss moving that project forward. So those guidelines or recommendations in that traffic impact assessment will help guide improvements to the area. And of course that would be a phased approach, just as the development itself is phased. So roadworks likely wouldn't all come online at the beginning of the project, but over time. And finally, I just wanted to touch upon park dedication. So the attached CD2 zone that's or attached to the staff report doesn't specifically identify a location of a park, but the developer has indicated that they intend to provide park space and want to work with residents to determine what that park would look like. And staff, of course, are able to request 5% park dedication under provincial legislation at the subdivision stage. So with that, I'll turn it back over to your worship, and then if there's any questions later, staff are here to provide answers to that.
Mr. MacArthur, can I also have you assure our citizens that by looking at producing the bylaw for the local area service and taking a loan out on behalf of this organization, that the city is not going to be out dollars? Can you explain that again so that we ensure the citizens that this is not a risk for us?
Sure, thanks, Your Worship. So as mentioned, staff did ask the developers with regard to that if there are overages, especially with regard to the increasing cost of building materials as of late, and both applicants indicated verbally that they would be responsible for any overages with regard to the local area service. So the works that are identified in the local area service petition. So those are outlined as 7.554 million. There are the additional works, though, that were identified by the city's consultant engineer, WSP. As mentioned, 13.2 was the estimate that they came up with, and again, that's a preliminary estimate. And those works are not included in this local area service petition, so they would need to be covered in other ways. And so one of those ways would be to update the development cost charges bylaw to ensure that there are projects identified in that new bylaw or the revised bylaw where funds from development applications in the city would be directed through DCC's fees to those project accounts and then withdrawn as those projects are implemented. If there are additional costs above and beyond the DCC's fees, then city staff would have to work with the developer to find ways to cover those costs. And beyond that, I would maybe ask Mr. Smith to comment on whether there would be grants or other city funds that would be directed towards that as well.
Mr. Smith, can you comment on that?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I want to discuss it. Anytime there's any development happening, it's not completely without risk. It's the first thing I want to say. What you do is you work with the developer to minimize those risks as much as possible by building in multiple layers of safety and safeguards. So you heard Don talk about the overages. You also heard him talk about security that would be taken to ensure coverage of those particular portions of the works. You didn't hear this, but in private conversations that we've had with the developer talking about the importance of making sure that the funds are there at the start of the project so we don't just get halfway through and say, oh, no, we're out of money. You know, that's a horrible outcome for communities. It's happened in the past. And so we've discussed with them, and they're in the process of developing something of a tendering strategy so that they are going to know, hopefully at the outset of the project, exactly what the total project costs are going to be so that there can be a level of comfort to understand what the process for change orders is going to be and ensure that that capital is there up front. And so as Don said as well, there is a process that we would look to here is if DCCs are insufficient, and the short of it is, frankly, we think they will be, unless a new DCC bylaw is in place prior to the starting of this project. It will be a condition of the subdivision process that they enter into this cost-sharing agreement. So council is going, before any subdivision ever is processed here, there's going to need to be an agreement that comes forward before council again to satisfy you that the works are going to be sufficiently covered by the developer for the in-town portions. So again, the LAS bylaw, I would think of it as being for all of the new infrastructure, and then this would be to cover the infrastructure upgrades. So most of it is increases in pipe diameter to handle the increased effluent to the sewage treatment plant. So there are a number of levels of protections that have been put in place. I can honestly say that we've been satisfied with the developer's approach. They understand, they're not looking to cut corners. And so that's something that has been positive from staff in working with this. We understand when we come and say, hey guys, our DCC bylaw isn't sufficient, where there could be frustration on the parts of developers. And I think that I mean, maybe they are frustrated, but they acknowledge that when you're working in a smaller community and not everything is perfectly up to date, there's a process there that may be required on top of what is already currently in place. So I think from the staff perspective, we're satisfied that developers are going to take every step, and the city is certainly going to create those safeguards to ensure that the costs are adequately borne by the developers.
Thank you very much for that. Does anyone else have questions for staff? Councillor White.
In the sewer treatment plant, do we have to have a bigger?
Thank you for the reminder. Sorry, ma'am. We've got a public hearing here, it's not a...
Oh, I see, okay.
Thank you. And we will address your questions in the rest of the agenda, not in the public hearing. Thank you for reminding me. I need to ask Mr. Lois if all of the advertising requirements were met.
Yes, Your Worship, we advertised twice in the Merritt Herald as required, and there was a notice posted on the site, and the neighbours were also informed, which involved Mr. MacArthur writing to the Queen, well, technically the Ministry. So yes, they were.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we will go on to the submissions. And can we have staff read them to us, please?
Thank you, Your Worship. The first submission is from Darch Oborn, Merritt City Council. I believe that creating another city at 286 is a mistake and urge reconsideration. We have already seen the effect of creating a similar development adjacent to the freeway, and this proposal would also include offices, administrative uses, and it led to the decay of our downtown. Retain these lands as residential usage and let our existing downtown serve as a source of commerce for the residents. I do not support the rezoning. Darch Oborn, 1699 Ponderosa Way. The next application, or the next submission, do you want me to read this one as well?
Oh, that's one. I need the third one, because that can give tax changes.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is from Susan Roline on behalf of Spyam Holdings Limited Partnership. On behalf of Spyam Holdings LP, please accept this letter in support of Ladner Ventures Incorporated Palomino Point Estates proposal. A proposal which we understand will be a mixed-use community comprised of low to medium density residential, commercial and office uses. OCP amendment. Bylaw 2310 is seeking to amend the city's OCP designation for the subject lands from future development to comprehensive residential commercial. This proposed development lies within Gateway 286 sector, which is recognised as a significant and major entry into the city of Merritt. The proposal is consistent with policies found within the OCP that speak to the city's intention to increase the profile of the area as a major gateway into the community. Zoning bylaw amendment. Bylaw 2311 is seeking to amend zoning bylaw number 2284/2020 so that the subject lands are rezoned from large parcel residential R1A and agricultural AR1 to comprehensive development CD2. The rezoning would allow the development to proceed as proposed by providing site-specific zoning regulations that will guide future development. Spyam Holdings LP has been working alongside Ladner Ventures Inc. over the past year on a number of initiatives within the Gateway 286 development area, with the common goal being to bring much-needed housing, employment and tax revenue to the city of Merritt. Approval of the OCP and zoning amendments for Palomino Point Estates will be yet another step toward developing the Gateway 286 sector as envisioned by the official community plan. Thank you for your time. Susan Roline, Chair, Spyam Holdings LP.
Public hearing. 2320 Hamilton Hill Road. Attention Mayor and Council, Greg Lois, Director of Corporate Services. I have several concerns about allowing this development to proceed. First, it is a well-known fact that global warming is happening. I want absolute proof that Merritt has a sustainable water supply for at least 75 years. The glaciers that supply many of the rivers are melting at an alarming rate, and these supply our river systems. Our sewer system will be taxed to the limit when hundreds more buildings are added. Will the current residents of Merritt be required to contribute to a sewer system upgrade? This should be paid for by the developer. We, the local taxpayers, are not receiving any benefits from any further development. Sprinkling restrictions are in place, so why do you even consider adding more water use to an area kilometers from downtown? Has the developer put in place any requirements for less water usage, i.e. underground tanks for collecting grey water, no lawns that need to be sprinkled, a collection basin for storm drain water that can be reused? The winter of 2020 and 2021 was a perfect example of how ill-prepared the city is for snow removal. This area on Hamilton Hill has snowfall long before the downtown area. Do the businesses and residents have to wait until this area is plowed before the downtown is plowed? Please consider carefully before making any decisions about this development. How will this development benefit all the taxpayers and citizens of Merritt? Remember, more is not always better. Respectfully submitted, Linda A. Baird, 1837 First Avenue.
Thank you, and there's a video that we have
Yes,
in
Your
the
Worship.
books.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council and staff. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present here today, or this evening, I should say. My name is Davin Shalong, and my company, Applin Martin Consultants, represents the developer of this site that we're going to be discussing. They're known as Palomino Point Estates. If the city needs an office address for the record, our office address is 1258 Ellis Street, and we're located in Kelowna, BC. I'm here today to provide you with a presentation for this rezoning application. Unfortunately, at the time that I recorded this presentation, Mr. MacArthur's staff report wasn't available to the public. So if I happen to duplicate any statements or information that he's already covered, please accept my apologies. With that said, I do commit to being as brief as possible with my presentation. Based on some of your previous agendas, I can only imagine that the current agenda is a long one. So my understanding is that there's two concurrent applications before you. There's going to be the OCP amendment related to the 286 development, and then of course there's this specific application, the zoning amendment. For the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to focus specifically on the rezoning application, and the rezoning application will generally be about land use. So it's a quick change from what the site is currently zoned as to what we want to zone it as. But I will provide you with a little bit of background on what the vision is for the site as well. Moving along. So the application intent, as I mentioned, there is an official community plan amendment that's related to changing the future development status to a comprehensive residential commercial for the 286 area. And then of course the focus of this presentation is the amendment to the zoning bylaw. So we're looking to rezone this particular parcel, which is roughly 26 hectares or 64.5 acres, whichever metric you choose to use, and it is agriculture and large lot residential, so a split zone there on the parcel, and we're looking to rezone that to a comprehensive development zone. So that is essentially a custom zone, as I refer to it from time to time. Before I get into the specifics of the application, I want to review the site context, particularly the location. As Council is more than likely aware, the site is situated at the southeast corner of Merritt city limits, roughly 4 kilometers southeast of the downtown. And again, the property is roughly 64.5 acres in size. If you can see my cursor, our parcel is located here, and we front Hamilton Hill Road, and of course 97C, Highway 97C, or the connector is just beyond that. To the west of our site is the Gaudie Creek Recreational Haven area. I don't think that's the formal name, but I'll just say that because I know people love it. And to the west of that is the Tourist Information Center, which, as we know, is not operational at this point in time. Overall, there is on this particular site here, a multi-phased commercial development that is being proposed by this Byam Holdings Limited Partnership. We have been actually working quite closely with this group to ensure that everybody is on the same page, and that collectively we all kind of have those shared goals and vision for the area. I want to talk about the policy context a little bit in terms of the OCP and then zoning. This particular area, Gateway 286, is identified by the current OCP, and it's actually identified as a sector area. So, but the overall vision is a mixed-use neighborhood that provides a mixture of low to medium density residential, commercial, and office uses. And you'll see here that on our next slide that is exactly what we're trying to achieve, is something that's aligned with your OCP. Collectively, our vision is to create a mixed-use and sustainable gateway community that provides a range of housing options and opportunities for economic growth and employment for the collective community. This particular neighborhood is going to grow into something that is quite lively and active, and it's going to offer some features that are obviously representative of mixed residential, commercial, and recreational uses, where residents have an opportunity to live within those, work, and play as well. As I did mention, this is something that is aligned with the OCP, and but before I move into that, I want to talk about the site a little bit more. In terms of some site features, topography, the site is a greenfield development, so it's never been developed before. It's covered by grasses, it's isolated tree stands, and it has packed sandy gravel areas. If you're familiar with the site, there's quite clear evidence of unauthorized use of the lands by various recreational activities, and these include, people who are walking, hiking, mountain biking, all-terrain vehicles, and even just like your average trucks and cars that are out there. From an environmental perspective, we do have the benefit of retaining a qualified environmental professional, or a QAP. We were quite pleased to learn that the site does not present any highly sensitive environmental features. With that said, there are some areas of the site that we want to be mindful of, and it's very possible that we will, at the subdivision stage, when we get into our detailed design, we will be establishing some setbacks and potentially compensating for certain areas. Now, those compensation areas will be in alignment with provincial regulation and legislation. We also have benefited from undertaking a geotechnical study, and generally the site is they told us the obvious remarks, it's hillside, but one thing that we're particularly interested in is that it is covered with a stiff silt or compact sand and gravel soils, and as such, the development that we're proposing here is quite suitable. So we were quite happy to hear that. I want to talk about how we've apportioned this site. So I've talked about our development vision, and I've also talked about how we're doing a commercial component and a residential component. If you can see my cursor, this pink or reddish area is what we've identified as sub-area B within the proposed zone, and that is the commercial area. This northern portion of the site is an ideal location for these commercial uses, and what we anticipate here is hopefully a hotel that might host a restaurant, maybe some lounge facilities, meeting or convention spaces, and then other ancillary uses. I want to make something very clear to everybody because I think it's important. I can't stress enough that although we're proposing a commercial use here, it is not our intent to detract from Merritt's downtown. In fact, what we're hoping to do is really give Merritt's downtown a boost through this development. But we are also hoping to provide an opportunity for a hotelier to come into the picture and potentially offer some ancillary uses and ideally an opportunity for a convention center. And as such, you're able to host conventions where attendees will be able to go into your downtown and explore the rest of your community. So that is the intent here. In terms of the teal area outside of this pink reddish area, this is sub area A, and this is where we intend for the surrounding lands to be developed into that complete neighborhood that are going to provide low to medium density housing options for people of all ages, but specifically targeted at aging individuals or that senior demographic. So, in terms of the rationale or the justification for the application, we know that there is no existing conventional zone in your current zoning bylaw that supports or facilitates what we're looking to do, and as such, that is why an amendment is being made to the zoning bylaw to rezone these lands from agriculture and large lot residential to the CD zone. Really, the purpose is to allow for the creation of a comprehensive and site-specific land use for these lands. Beyond that, and kind of going higher up to your OCP level, we are aligned with the OCP policy on this, and in my personal opinion, I believe that we do follow exactly the intent of what the city is looking for as identified within your OCP. Some quick development facts here. Right now, the way we see it is we're looking at roughly 35% of the site will be single detached residential. We're also hoping to put in some multifamily residential. Again, the intent there is to work with the lay of the land, but also provide some more affordable options for individuals. This particular zone would give us an opportunity for townhomes and potentially apartments, but at this point in time, if I'm being fully transparent, right now we're leaning more towards the townhomes than anything versus the apartment. So 20% there. Roughly 30% of this site will be left untouched as either formal open space, such as a park, or passive open space in its natural state. And again, we are very excited to be working with individuals to see exactly what the appropriate style and programming of a formal park might look like, the size of it, and of course our neighbors to the west, the Gaudy Creek enthusiasts. We want to make sure that if there's any we want to make sure that there's no adverse effects to existing trails that may fall on the subject lands here. And then lastly, 15% commercial, and I did again reference that we're not looking to integrate a large component of this because we do not want to detract from the downtown area. I'm almost finished, I promise, but I do want to go over some of the benefits to Merritt. Obviously, one of the big ones being the gateway neighborhood for everyone, and I think the Gateway 286 area is that area that both staff, council, and members of the community have really been looking forward to. So again, as a planner, I see an opportunity here for people who are traveling on the highway to have an excuse to stop rather than continuing their trip, you know, whether it be Vancouver or Kamloops or Kelowna. Development within this area will be an attractant, and I think it will give individuals an opportunity to stop. Having said that, I also think that it will give opportunities for members of the community itself to be a part of. Housing affordability and diversity. So we talked about that single detached housing and townhomes. We've introduced that mix predominantly because we want to make sure there are affordable housing options. And right now, depending on where the final numbers come out, we're quite encouraged by what we're seeing, and we do believe that we're going to be able to offer housing for the aging population or the seniors demographic that is achievable, and achievable where the housing typology and the floor plans really lend itself to people who may not want 3 flights of stairs to walk up and down, or if you have a mobility challenge, there are options there as well. And these housing options will obviously be aligned and in accordance with the BC STEP code and building code as well. Environmental sustainability, again, we want to be very mindful of the sensitivities out there, and we want to ensure that that is being protected and preserved, and as such we're making every effort necessary to make sure that we have, you know, setbacks in place or we're compensating appropriately. Aging in place, this is the target audience. This is what our client wants to do, is provide housing for the aging demographic, and doing that is critical, but doing it while there's that healthy aspect really infused within it is especially critical. So this particular rezoning and subsequent development will enable this site to provide the much needed senior housing units that is required. And you'll see that we've got a little note here that we've pulled from your recently released housing needs report, identifying that you do have an aging population and there is a need for housing there. So I promised to be brief, so I'm going to leave it there. I thank you sincerely for your time and consideration, and thank you for listening. Again, I'm myself, on behalf of my team and the Palomino Estates team, we're very happy and encouraged by this development, and we're quite excited to be working with you, Mr. MacArthur and his staff, on bringing this to fruition. I'd like to offer you an opportunity to ask me any questions, but this being a pre-recorded session, we can't do that. But if there's a way to do that via email, I'm happy to entertain. I'm currently watching this, and it's very weird listening to myself talk right now. But if we can, if there's a way for me to answer any questions, I would love to do that. Again, thank you very much, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. And that brings us to the end of the public hearing session. Now, Mr. Lois, I need your help. We didn't move to a public hearing, but I still think we need to move out of the public hearing.
Your Worship, as you correctly note, we never adjourned an ordinary council meeting, so this entire public hearing has been taking place as part of that. So as a result, I don't think you can move and vote to return to a meeting that you never left.
Okay.
However, that said, you would need to consider whether or not you've received enough input at this public hearing, whether or not you want to adjourn the public hearing at this time and continue with the readings in this council meeting, or if you want to extend the hearing, or if you want to do anything else.
What is the wish of council? If we adjourn public hearing, we will need to have a motion for that. So, Councillor Christopherson and Councillor Fair. Luck. All in favor? Oh, you're going to speak to this?
I suppose I have one question. In regards to closing the public hearing, I mean, we've heard from a couple of citizens and the engineer and the developer contractor on this. Was that about all the input that we seem to receive on this? Is it was pretty quiet out there on this one? Is that what I'm sensing?
That was all the input that we received for this hearing. There was nobody who tried to make any late input or anything. That you've received everything that was sent to the city.
Okay, good. Thank you very much for that.
Okay, all in favor? Opposed? None carried. So we now move into delegations, and I understand there is nobody from the Kamloops Food Policy Council.
That's correct, Your Worship. I think we'll be trying to reschedule that. So
Okay, thank you. And the 6.2 is the petition from the use of McFarlane Lane. We have a petition, we have the petition sent to us. Is there a delegation? Mr. Lois.
Thank you, Your Worship. They sent in the petition, but didn't request to speak to it directly. They do make a specific request in there for council to consider amending the zoning bylaw. City staff have, we've read this petition, and so if you have questions or queries about the ask for residents, then Mr. MacArthur and I are prepared to take those.
And we do have questions for staff. I have questions for staff. Mr. MacArthur, can you speak to this potential for changing the zoning?
Thank you, Your Worship. And just to provide a little bit of background on this as well, when residents originally approached the city to ask bylaw enforcement to investigate noise and dust from apparent sandblasting at the light industrial site on McFarlane Way there at 1188 McFarlane, the bylaw enforcement officer did attend the site and spoke with the manager at the site. And I won't go into too much detail on the corporate services side and the conversations around that. I'll let Mr. Lois speak to that in a little bit. But the MCON manager there did inform the bylaw enforcement officer that they would be looking to move the activities elsewhere on the site. Development Services then conducted a site visit as well yesterday on June 7th and spoke with the manager. The manager indicated that they had also had a WSB visit, and as a result of city visits and WSB, they indicated, or the manager indicated, that the business would like to erect a removable Quonset hut on the site to contain the dust and activities within a structure. When staff were there on site yesterday, we took photos and noted that the berm that separates the industrial site with the residential properties to the north is approximately 20 feet high. However, it doesn't include landscaping atop the buffer or atop the berm, and the zoning bylaw does have provisions to provide that, so I'll speak to that a little bit in a moment. The petition's proposal here is to change the current zoning bylaw, which wouldn't solve the issue that they're trying to resolve, because the business operations on the site began in late 2015, and therefore because the use began in 2015, the use is subject to the 2015 zoning bylaw regulations, not the current zoning bylaw regulations. In other words, it's a legal non-conforming use at this point if changes are made to the new zoning bylaw. So just changing the new zoning bylaw wouldn't necessarily resolve the issue that residents would like it to. The 2015 zoning bylaw in the intent section of the light industrial M1 zone expressly permits nuisances, interestingly. So nuisances such as dust and others. So I'll read that section here. The light industrial zone is oriented towards a range of light and medium manufacturing and other industrial uses that are likely to require outdoor storage and or produce noise, smoke, dust, glare, fumes, or odors. That language was removed in the new zoning bylaw. So when we updated the zoning bylaw that council adopted on September 1st of 2020, the expressly permitted nuisances that were in the 2015 bylaw were removed. So that has already been done. So I'm not sure that amending this current zoning bylaw would really be necessary since that's already been changed. And again, it wouldn't affect this parcel anyways because the use began prior to the new zoning bylaw. Having said that, there are a number of options that staff have come up with, so I'll propose those here for council consideration. One would be that staff could enforce the 2015 zoning bylaw's landscape buffer provisions, which require a 3-meter wide landscaped area. And of that 3-meter wide landscaped area, 5% would have to be treed. So the trees obviously would have to be installed atop the berm. Trees covering 5% of that landscape area might not provide adequate protection, as you might guess. But that is an option. The second option is that staff could process a building permit for the new Quonset hut that the manager indicated they'd like to erect on the site. Without having a design for that removable structure, we don't currently know whether it would be adequate to contain the sandblasting noise and dust, whether it has all 4 walls or if it's just one of those sort of Quonset huts that have the ends open to it. We wouldn't know unless we got an application in for a building permit. We wouldn't be able to say that at this time, but that's certainly an option as well. A third option would be to make additional revisions to the current zoning bylaw, further limiting nuisance activities on properties. As mentioned, in 2015, when the zoning bylaw was revised, the clause permitting nuisances was removed. There was also a clause that was added that prohibits outdoor activities in the M1 zone. So 7.21.7, all permitted uses must be contained completely within an enclosed structure. So we already have that in the new zoning bylaw. So these are things that staff had already anticipated. And again, whether we need to make additional revisions to the current zoning bylaw, if council would like to do that, staff are certainly happy to put together some recommendations and bring that back to council. However, again, that won't specifically be applicable to this site because it would be legal non-conforming and subject to the previous zoning bylaw that allowed these activities. And then the fourth option here would be to revise the Good Neighbor Bylaws nuisance provisions, which may not be adequate for enforcement of these activities at this time. And I'll let Mr. Lois speak to the Good Neighbor Bylaw and the nuisance regulations there because that's under his purview.
Thank you. Mr. Lois.
Thank you, Don, Your Worship. So the Good Neighbor Bylaw, this one, essentially, when it comes to a lot of our bylaw enforcement in Merritt, we typically try to be fairly soft, gentle, educational. We like to resolve things as much as possible through negotiating with people and trying to keep everyone happy rather than just walking and ticketing people. But sometimes we absolutely simply don't have the capacity to, even if we wanted to, and this is one of those situations. The Good Neighbor Bylaw does not have any real power at the moment over some of the things that we are allowed to regulate under the community charter, such as, so section 64 of the charter clarifies section 83H, which is one of our fundamental powers to regulate nuisances, disturbances, and other objectionable situations, to cover noise, vibration, odor, dust, illumination, or any other matter liable to disturb the quiet, peace, rest, enjoyment, comfort, or convenience of individuals or the public. At the moment, we simply don't really exercise that. That the only provisions that we have that talk about industrial areas at all are the sections which say that the noise provisions in the Good Neighbour bylaw don't apply to heavy industrial, so that's not relevant to this situation, where the property is on light industrial. So essentially, the Good Neighbour bylaw it is a potential avenue to do things, but at the moment we historically haven't. So yeah, that's a power which could be available to you that we're not exercising.
Thank you. Are there any questions for either staff member? Councillor Christopherson.
Is the property large enough that they could relocate that part of the operation to another part on the site? Or if that's not a situation, can they completely relocate that portion of their operations?
Mr. McFarlane.
Thank you, Councillor Christopherson, through your worship. I wouldn't want to speak for the business owner, of course, but the site itself, or the parcel, is fairly large. There does appear to be some space. However, the south of the parcel is where the driveway enters the site, so they likely want to keep that area unobstructed so that they can have free access in and out of the site and in and about the site. They were suggesting that the Quonset hut would be located at the north of the parcel, so it would still be close to the residence area. However, staff could work with the business owner to see if there's other areas of the site that would be more suitable.
Councillor Locke.
Yeah, that was going to be my question, Mr. MacArthur, is that we can work with it. I mean, it sounds like they volunteered to put this Quonset hut up, and it sounds like it could be probably not a 100% solution because there's still going to be noise coming out of it. Certainly, that dust control would be huge for I think for the citizens over there. So, is there have we already started talks with them to see what kind of Quonset hut or building they're going to put in there to be able to contain that? Have you got any preliminaries from the business yet?
Thank you, Councillor Leck, through your worship. We haven't received an application yet. Like I say, we did speak with the manager yesterday, and he indicated verbally that that's what he would like to do. As you know, our building official situation right now is that we have consultant officials, and the building official who has to work on industrial projects is not in until Friday. So once that staff member or that consultant building official is in, we'll be able to speak with him and see how we can move that forward, along with the business owner.
That would be really good if we can work with this to solve this issue. Would be huge if we can compromise a little bit where we can to get this done for the citizens over there. That'd be huge for them. I wouldn't want that dust flying all over my backyard for sure. So whatever we can do to help, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
And I have no further questions for staff. But, well, hold on, I do have one. When we talk about making a motion to look at landscaping the buffer, we've already got that availability. So, do you need a motion from us? No. You can just go there and do that on your own. Okay, and the same thing with the building permit. You don't need any order from us. You can do that on your own. And I know that you're continuing to look at the Good Neighbour bylaws, and you've heard our concerns, so I assume you're going to do that as well. You don't need a motion from us for that.
Your worship, we only need a motion if you want to give us specific instruction to do something. If it's something which it is worth noting that staff do have powers to do a range of things that we don't do on a daily basis because we don't have the resources to, but if council instructed us to, then we would of course kick that way up the priority tree and spend a lot more time on it. This sort of thing, I think we would be looking to exercise the powers that we do have, of course, to try to mitigate any problems, but if you do want us to specifically do something, then a resolution for that would be helpful if you want to make sure it's done the way you want it to be. But I think Mr. Smith also wants to.
Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think that council has made note of this, and we've heard it from various residents at different times, but there are a number of different industrial properties that run afoul of certain provisions of kind of a number of our bylaws. And what has been important to talk about in the past is that if we are going to implement a system, it should be a system that is kind of broadly applicable to all properties. So if we are going to, say, introduce and require more strict adherence to landscape provisions, which personally I think we should be moving towards, but there's been different opinions on that in the past. But if we do go down that path, it should be holistic and broadly applicable to all parcels. And I will say that there was kind of an effort to move down that path historically when the city brought on a second bylaw officer. There were a number of different kind of concerns that were raised by citizens, as well as at the time some members of council and other issues, which led us to going back to a one bylaw officer model that was more of an educational approach. And so we can and will take direction from council. My ask is that we do not like being put in a position where we're asked to treat one property owner differently than everyone else when they can point fingers at everybody and say, well, they're not doing it. And it's a very challenging situation. So whatever we do, we would like to do broadly. And I will say that resource-wise, our ability to enforce broadly is fairly limited right now.
And I agree with that to a certain degree. When there is a fear of a community of having health issues because of something, then it becomes a bigger priority than the guy who's just doing something that's not creating a potential.
Absolutely, and I think that I don't want to say that we aren't absolutely happy to work with individual property owners whenever these situations come up. It's when it comes to more regimented enforcement that we're taking that approach.
But if we can get the landscape berm and the process for the building permit and the good neighbor bylaw looked at overall, then we've accomplished what we started out to do. And I think the fellow that came to me was concerned about it stopping. If there's a Quonset hut available, it may solve the problem. So I'm happy with that. Councillor Bangu.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'm happy to hear that the manager is wanting to solve this problem. Was there a timeline on this hut? And can we ask for a timeline? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bengu, through your worship. No, the manager didn't provide a timeline around that, but like I mentioned, we would be talking to the building official consultant when he's in on Friday to follow up with the business owner and see if we can expedite that application.
Councillor Etchard.
I like the idea of the Quonset because the trees at 5% of the space probably wouldn't really control much of the dust or the noise. Any ideas if it would be enclosed? We don't know yet. That was just a suggestion maybe, or?
Thank you, Councillor Richard, through your worship. Again, the manager indicated that he wanted to use a Quonset hut, but whether that would be an enclosed Quonset hut on all four sides or whether one or more sides would be open, we don't know yet until they apply. But certainly we would be encouraging them to have a structure that would be limiting the dust and noise to the greatest extent possible.
Great.
And I believe that action will be tolerated by some of the community members. Councillor White.
In the petition it says they're sandblasting with lead paint. How do you sandblast with lead paint? Is it two separate?
Thank you, Councillor White, through your worship. The manager explained that they're doing the sandblasting on used vehicles, sort of older construction vehicles, and they're doing that to remove paint from the vehicles so that they can refurbish those vehicles. So that's probably where they were suggesting the paint. Yeah, so it's a paint removal process.
Okay.
Councillor Fair.
Thank you, and I can see how this is a concern for the residents certainly, and the adjacency of this industrial park is so close that they're both trying to do what they do without infringing on each other's comfort and health, obviously. So I'm curious as to when council would hear back. Is there a follow-up report as to the results of what you guys are working on?
Thank you, Councillor Fair, through your worship. If council would like us to report back, we could certainly do so. So if council so directs, we will bring a report to a future council meeting.
Is it desired that we do that? Are you going to make that motion?
I'll make that motion that council please report back regarding this situation.
Seconder? And Christopherson? So Fair and Christopherson. And any more dialogue on this one? All in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. Thank you. So now we move to unfinished business 7.1. Councillor Richard, at the May 25th meeting, you moved the following notice of motion that council consider controlling cats in the animal control bylaw. So you moved. To speak to this, we need a seconder.
I'll second.
Councillor White. Would you like to speak to this, Councillor Richard?
Some concerns were brought up by some residents about animals being fed in the parks. And so of course, we don't want to see wildlife finding a food source in the park, like other areas have had animal attacks. As it is, I think last week I noticed on social media that somebody was talking about a black bear being in the middle of town during the day. And so having an active food source in Rotary Park doesn't seem like a good idea. And in Bylaw 2241, which was passed in September 2018, cats are excluded. And it's not that I don't like cats, because I do. It's just I don't think we should be feeding them and encouraging leaving open food out for wild animals, potentially, for safety of everyone. Thanks.
If I can speak a little bit to this, the idea of controlling cats in the animal control bylaw probably has to be a little bit more defined for staff to really understand where you're going with this. So, Mr. Smith, can I have you speak to
Your Worship, and through to Councillor Richard as well. Thanks for bringing this forward. That actually, the context really does help, and this is always the struggle with notices of motion, because initially when it was brought forward, I was thinking it was more of a cat licensing regime, which may have greater reservation towards, just because it's been implemented in other communities to very little success, and it's quite an expensive program. But the primary concern is kind of feeding of feral cats. Is that correct? That might be a more niche issue that might be addressable, and we could probably do some research and bring a report forward to council if that would be of assistance.
Councillor Echard?
Yeah, that was the concern. There is one individual who was spaying cats and then leaving them in the park. And so, of course, we don't want our public park to become a home to homeless cats who are being fed in the park as well. So that was the other concern for the residents, because some of the neighboring properties are finding that they have cats sleeping on their furniture and damaging it and defecating on it, and you know, I just don't want to encourage that within the city, that's all.
And I think it's fair. We'll be the first to tell you that just because cats aren't regulated does not mean they are not a problem. They have and do introduce challenges for many residents, and there's particular colonies that will kind of root up, and sometimes it is nearing where they have access to food. And so council may recall one of these was during your term and one wasn't, but in 2016 and 2018 the city did run a trap, neuter, return program, which was funded by the BCSPCA, and so the idea behind that is you take the capture the feral cats, have them neutered, and then returned to where they were found. And ultimately, BCSDCA says that that's kind of the best, most ethical way of, the most humane way of controlling cat populations. That being said, it did introduce its own sets of challenges.
But there's a caveat to that. From what I understand, they won't release them unless they have somebody looking after them. So if, that's what they have told me.
Yeah. When you say they, because it was the city that was doing it before.
Yes, but under the program of SPA, once the cats are neutered, they only release them back to a neighborhood where there's somebody willing to look after them. Otherwise,
no, they were released to wherever they were found. Regardless, there was no information as to where they were being looked after. It just so happens that we do have a number of individuals who do look after many of these stray colonies, and so I think that might have been what was happening, but it wasn't a requirement of the program.
okay, thank you for clarifying that. And Councillor Archer, I'm going to go on to Councillor Christopherson.
Thank you. I believe the Bear Aware program kind of addresses some of that issue, because anytime people feed wild animals, whether it's cats or skunks or whatever it is, it attracts other animals into the area, such as the coyotes and things like that. And so perhaps it's more of an education thing as well, that people really should not be feeding the wild animals, even the birds. Bird feeders can cause havoc with bringing in wild animals and so on. So I would hope that it would be part of the city education program to discourage people from thinking they're being kind when really what they're doing is causing nuisances that can create havoc if wild animals start coming into the city. Stanley Park is a case issue and where they've had really difficult times and people are being attacked. So I would hope that we could look at this from that point of view of don't feed the wildlife. Thanks.
I think that certainly more education can happen down this front as to not encouraging people to feed feral animals. One of the challenges in kind of the intersection between wildlife and cats, which aren't considered wildlife, is we actually don't even have the regulatory authority to do anything with wildlife. That rests with the province. And so we can regulate certain animals, but not other animals. But feral cats are inbounds for municipalities for what we can do. But it's kind of good sense that you don't feed bears, but it's the province that deals with that, enforces that, regulates that. Feeding feral cats is something that we deal with, and we need to kind of jointly work on our communication and messaging on that front. But I think that if this is really kind of about trying to assist with reducing populations overall and encouraging people not to actively promote the health of feral cat colonies, I think that there's some things that we may be able to bring back on that.
Councillor Etcher.
It was mostly that the bylaw was passed 2241, which was at the end of the previous council's term. So it wasn't a decision that was discussed among this group, but cats were excluded under that bylaw, and so that was the main thing. And I think it was because people thought, well, they weren't going to license cats like they do dogs, and I can appreciate why, but as you're seeing more activity of animals in the community, that's a big concern. Plus the mess that the cats can make when they're not yours. Thanks.
And fairness, I recall Councillor Christopherson something about birds or chickens or something like that. There was a
pigeons.
Pigeons. That was it. Birds. Okay, it was birds. Yeah.
And I can speak a little bit to what the rationale for why council made that previous decision. And it largely was around expectations of community members. If they see a wandering cat under the old bylaw, despite the fact that wasn't something that we did, we don't have a pound for cats, we don't necessarily go and pick them up, but there was an expectation that we did because of what was in the bylaw. And so the intent was to make it very clear that this wasn't something that the city as a whole was taking on as a service for the citizens. And so I think that it was really about drawing that clear line was what the, I shouldn't pin it on council, at the recommendation of staff, this was what we had the capacity to deal with. And so again, CAP programs can be implemented if that's the direction, but they're expensive and very, very time consuming.
And not only expensive operationally with having staff members look for them, but we also don't have the physical accommodation. We have a dog pound, but we do not have a cat pound. So that was the problem we had in 2018 and still have now. Okay, I thought I saw other hands up, but anybody else have anything on this? So we are considering controlling cats by not offering food or something like that in the animal control bylaw. Does that adequately address the issue, Mr. Lewis?
Your Worship, I think what we've heard from the discussion you've had is something along the lines of that Council will direct staff to draft amendments to the animal control bylaw to prohibit the feeding of feral cats.
Oh, I like that much better.
Okay.
Thank you.
I would actually say if we could do one step prior to that is that council directs staff to bring a report regarding these potential amendments, just in case those amendments aren't ultimately required and it ends up being education. So don't want to propose amendments that ultimately may not be necessary.
And mover and seconder, are you fine with the wording?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. All in favor? Opposed? None carried. We move on to bylaws. 8.1, we have the...
I think it was the report. That's what
Oh, we have a resolution on the table, and so we just amended it, so I'm going to change it to what you guys had said.
And, yes.
We do a lot of that more figure with that.
Sorry, there was a side conversation. I had no idea what went on. So.
There was no side conversation. You just forgot to state what we were doing.
We're moving on to 8.1. And we have staff report on 8.1.
Not much of a report, Your Worship. Just a comment. This is, speaking of animal control, these are the changes that you gave three readings to at the last meeting that would change things like the hen licensing regulations. I think this is just the hen licensing stuff, unless there was other stuff as well. This was, but yeah, you read this 3 times and we introduced it at some more length. That's why there was also the changes to the dog licensing regime. So that was done at the last meeting. So this would be up for final adoption at this point.
Thank you. And we need a mover. That bylaw 2299-2021 be adopted. Luck and Hitchart. And anyone want to speak to this? All in favor? Opposed, none. Carried. 8.2, bylaw 2314, cemetery adoption. A similar short report from staff. Ms. Brick.
Thank you, Your Worship. At the May 25th council meeting, council considered 3 readings for the cemetery for amendments to the cemetery bylaw, which would include the columbarium, so the niche spaces for the columbarium, so it was included in that. And this bylaw is now ready for adoption, or for consideration of adoption.
And I need a mover that bylaw 2314-2021 be adopted. We have Councillor Christopherson and White, seconded. And anybody want to speak to this? Mr. Smith.
Your Worship, I did want to add one minor point of clarification. At the last meeting, you had inquired about the location of the columbarium, and I'd indicated that it is going to be moved. That is the case. I wanted to add, though, that you may recall that this is going to be a 2-year project. First one is kind of the raw earthworks for it, and the columbarium isn't going to be moved until the second year of this project. So it's not going to happen until 2022 when the there's still some
When
further
the grounds are
work.
ready for it.
Yeah, that's correct. So I think that I had indicated that it was going to be happening sooner than that. So my apologies for the incorrect assertion on that front.
Thank you. Councillor Christopherson.
Just to clarify, part of the grounds preparation, that's more of a beautification project, is it, to make it look attractive? And there, I think that was the original intention of the columbarium.
Yeah, so this year one is really about expanding capacity. Year two is kind of the beautification of the entirety of that new section of the cemetery. And so you are correct that we are looking to set this in its kind of proper columbarium garden setting, and the way the budget worked out for this year, in order to make sure that we could meet the cost requirements and project delivery timelines, the project got split in two. So a lot of the beautification isn't going to happen until next year.
Good, thank you.
And all in favor? Opposed? None carried. 8.3, bylaw 2315, 2021. Already received 3 readings on May 25th and is now up for adoption. So can we have a quick staff report? Mr. Lewis?
Yes, Your Worship, and I'm now on a much closer screen, much easier to read. So the fees and charges bylaw had a few consequential amendments as a result of the changes that you've made. For example, you've now adopted the animal control amendment, and therefore there are some changes required to the fees and charges bylaw for that. Also, the Finance Department had requested some changes for tax billing, and there was also the change to increase the flexibility about our commercial potable bulk water and liquid waste disposal sales. So those 3 proposals received 3 readings at the last council meeting and are now up for adoption.
Thank you. And I need a mover and a seconder that bylaw 2315, 2021 be adopted. Etcher and Fair. And anyone want to speak to this? If not, all in favor? Opposed? None carried. So now we're on to 8.4, bylaw number 2317, Fire Department remuneration. And Mr. Lewis, are you?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship.
Speak to this one. Staff report, please. Thank you.
So this is about remuneration of the on-call firefighters, which is set by Schedule B of the Fire Rescue Department Establishment Bylaw. Because of the wording of the schedule, as this was originally passed back in 2005, we've been doing manual updates to it to correct firefighter remuneration. This was last done 4 years ago, which means they've gotten a little out of date, and the fire department requested that it be reviewed. And so this proposed bylaw would update those rates of pay for the last 4 years and rationalize the additional clauses. So, any questions?
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Lewis? Okay, and I need a mover that council read Fire Department remuneration amendment bylaw number 2317, 2021, first time. So Christopherson and Luck. And anyone want to speak to this? Okay, I think it's timely. This fire department has been kind of left out over the last few years, so it's, in my mind, it's a worthwhile project. So, all in favor? Opposed? None carried. And I need a mover that council read Fire Department remuneration amendment bylaw number 2317, 2021 a second time. Chart and Fair. And anyone speak to this? All in favor? Opposed? None carried. And a mover and a seconder that council read Fire Department remuneration amendment bylaw number 2317, 2021 a third time. Etchart and White. And anybody? No takers? All in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. Now we move on to 8.5, the official community plan amendment bylaw for number 2311-2021, which is Hamilton Hill. And staff report. Mr. MacArthur.
Thank you, Your Worship. As mentioned, this report is with regard to the proposed OCP Amendment Bylaw 2310 and Zoning Amendment Bylaw 2311 for the property located at 2320 Hamilton Hill Road, for which there was a public hearing earlier this evening. I was fairly thorough in my report earlier at the public hearing, so I'll try to keep my comments extremely brief for this report and leave time for council debate and questions. Staff have printed copies of the recommended options for third reading. One point of clarification that I do want to make is that if council were to choose option 2 on the list, that is to amend either of the proposed bylaws, there may or may not be the need for a new public hearing, depending on the content of that hypothetical amendment. And Mr. Lois and I can assist council on that point if any amendments are requested. And with that, as I promised, I will keep this short. So if council has any questions, please feel free to ask.
This is the time for council questions. I want to go to Councillor White first. She had a question previously.
On the sewer tank, or what is it? The sewer holding tank, is it? Or what do you call it?
Treatment plant?
The treatment plant is in the town, right? So will that be expanded on, or like obviously it will have to be made bigger, right? Or something.
Thank you, Councillor White. Through your worship, the engineering WSP that was contracted to do the review didn't indicate that the wastewater treatment plant would require any upgrades due to this development. We, of course, are working on a wastewater treatment master plan, and that will identify how much capacity we have and what future requirements might be needed. But the sanitary upgrades that were identified by the engineer are in the nature of pipe diameter improvements, as Mr. Smith mentioned earlier. So to our knowledge, there wouldn't be a requirement for upgrade of the wastewater treatment plant as a result of this development.
So is that going to take in all the other developments that are happening? Or have those been taken into consideration along with this project?
Thank you, Councillor White, through your worship. And that is something that we do evaluate as each of those developments come along. So if future upgrades are needed to the wastewater treatment plant as a result of other developments, then that's something that may be triggered at that point. But from our modeling, that's not something that is anticipated at this time.
Mr. Smith, you have further information for us?
Don hit it on the head, but I do want to assure council as to where we currently are, so you can have a degree of confidence as to what our processing capacity is. I'm using approximate numbers, but we process about 3,000 cubic meters of effluent at our wastewater treatment plant every day. Our capacity is around 5,100 cubic meters of effluent. So we're running at about 60% capacity. And so when you think that we have a population of approximately 8,000 people, we could fairly readily take on about 4,000 more population with the existing infrastructure that we have. That being said, we plan for this now so that we don't get stuck in a Kamloops River situation where you aren't prepared to process that effluent. So we are looking at the wastewater treatment plant master plan. Council may remember that we've put in a grant request for that. particularly because when I'm saying 3,000 and 5,000, that's during dry season when we aren't having significant groundwater infiltration. During freshet in particular, where we do have that groundwater infiltration, we run close to and at times over our processing capacities. And so that isn't the end of the world. We've got workarounds. You can do bypasses. You can do discharge of processed influent into the river in accordance with our permit, but it's all less than ideal, and we wanted to find the best possible solution moving forward. So the short of this is, yes, we have sufficient capacity to accommodate this and every other development for the near term. That being said, we absolutely, it is the right time to be planning for what kind of the final build out for the city of Merritt would look like, and that population of over 12,000 or so. So further upgrades are going to be required, but it won't be required for the next decade.
Councillor White, are you done?
Well,
And Councillor Ferris, did you still have a? Thank you. And anybody else have any questions on this? I do. One of the things, and it's not maybe a question, a response to some of the public concerns that we had. It's not another city, it's another neighborhood, and they're asking, or the developer is very cognizant of the fact that they don't want to detract from the downtown area. And knowing that the developer is willing to be looking at what happens in our downtown area, I think it's a good thing. There was also a question about snow removal, and I'm thinking it's a priority system. They're not going to take priority over our current routes, and it would be built into that priority system somehow. There was some good ideas regarding, I guess, low-scaping underground tanks for gray water. I mean, who knows what else are there, but I'm assuming you've heard it and you will take that into consideration at some point. The glaciers is something I've never heard of. And is staff aware of any of the melting glaciers decreasing our water supply? And have we ever heard that provincially? Somebody, anybody?
Yeah. Your Worship, I don't think anybody on this staff would propose that we are experts in glaciology or anything of that nature. I can say that I've read many news articles talking about glaciers melting at alarming rates, but past that and what the specific impact is on our Nicola Valley, I am not even going to hazard the specific impacts there, and I'll leave it to somebody that's more knowledgeable in the area.
Thank you, and I think if there was a concern, we have provincial, regional experts that would be right on us, telling us that we should be looking at this, I would think. I'm going to go to Councillor Luck.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just a couple things. I think somebody addressed in the letter, like I think the mayor addressed this as well, is this is a new city center. This project, if the hotel goes ahead, what was the timeline on the hotel, Mr. McCarthy? That they weren't going to build that right away. That was going to be like 5-10 years down the road.
Mr. McCarthy.
Thank you, Councillor Luck, through your worship. Yeah, the plan that's been submitted by the proponent is that approximately 50% of the housing would be constructed in the first 10 years, and the hotel and the remainder of the housing constructed in years 11 through 20. Of course, that's a rough timeline, and development can change over time depending on economics and development cycles. But that's what's been provided to staff.
So we're not going to get a new city center that's going to develop overnight there from this development. I was quite surprised to see that like 50% of it is earmarked for commercial with the new hotel and convention center. So that was good. I think you addressed the sewer that was already talked about in there the capacity of the sewer system there.
Excuse me, did you mention 50% for commercial? Because they said 15.
15,
Okay.
15, sorry, 1.5, yeah, 1.5, so quite a bit less than a city center, right? So just wanted to make that very clear though, so 1.5%, yeah. And then this development's going to look at another 30% single family. I mean, we get a little heat lately for all the higher density developments, so they're proposing almost 30% of this to be single family residence here, so that's quite a whack in there too. And the nice thing about this is there's a future vision going on here where we want to be with the community here as we bring more people in the community. We are able to have jobs for people here with the convention center. That'd be really nice to see here, which I think we're short of convention space in this. We have ours here, but certainly as we grow and we can now offer this to other people, bring people in, bring tourism into the community, right? So that's a nice addition to have there. I think that was all my comments on this development. It's going to be a nice proposal up there. I don't know how that's going to be affected with the spam down below, but this seems like a nice development. And I think what we have to do is alleviate the fears that this isn't going to happen overnight. It's going to be a 20-year build out on this thing. I don't think I'll be here in 20 years, but anyway, which is a shame. I'd like to see this, see what the end product of this will be. So I appreciate the work they've been doing. Thank you.
Councillor White.
I certainly agree with the whole project up there between both parties. However, I would really like to have a little more information on and I realize that it is going to be a benefit to the downtown and the community, but I think it's very important that the existing community has some information on how they're going to face these challenges and prepare for them. And even though they say that it's a 10-year or 20-year down the road, the whole project isn't going to be 10 or 20 years down the road, and I think it's important that we're able to plan and look forward to how we're going to handle what's going to go on up there. And I do believe there will be benefit to the community and that there will be traffic into the town. But how much traffic and what can the downtown do to prepare for what is going to happen and how can we be a part of it? So for myself, I'd like to make a motion that we get a little more information on how that's going to be taken care of and how we can move forward with it and plan for it.
Can I have you hold on that motion? We've got a couple more councillors here that want to speak to it. Councillor Christopherson and then Councillor Fair.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to comment on the idea that creating other development areas has killed the downtown. The North End development hasn't sucked the life out of the downtown core. Some of the big box stores and the grocery store and the other little stores up there, they've kept residents here in Merritt instead of traveling out of the city to the larger centers. So they do have their place. And it's also up there created a neighborhood that's a viable, walkable community. So I think other development in the city and the surrounding areas adds to the climate here, the business climate. It doesn't detract from it. The Economic Development Committee is working very hard to make sure that the downtown area remains viable. So I think development in particular is very helpful for Merritt in bringing in visitors and residents.
Thank you, Councillor Fair. And then I'll go to Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship.
So, first I did want to ask a question about where exactly we are in the process here. I'm not sure if we have a motion or...
We don't have a motion on the table.
Yeah, please.
Excuse me, we don't have a motion on the table at this point in time. Thank you. Councillor Fair?
So I'll go ahead and with my comments.
Yes.
Okay, so regarding the sewage treatment plant, I recall our Public Works Director talking about this in, I'm sure, if memory serves, our first budget round. And I think it's something that has been foreseen by the Public Works Department and the city staff for a long time, and they have been planning for it. And now they're in the middle of a master plan. So I think, to me, as a citizen, that would, assuage my concerns over not planning ahead for this, because I think they have been and we continue to. Also, as a business owner downtown, I'm excited about this development. I look forward to the new opportunities that it'll bring. And I think as far as the concept of it detracting from downtown, I think really what it does is create opportunities to try and meet the demands of a new segment. So, yeah, that's about all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just going to suggest that obviously you can take run the meeting however you like, but we have been suggesting in recent months that all the questions to staff come first. So if it felt like we were going into debate, and I was just going to remind you that as things stand, there was no motion on the table, and so we would normally expect this to be questions.
Yes.
And you can run the meeting however you like.
Any other questions for staff? Mr. Luck.
Yeah, Mr. McCarthy, so we learned tonight that there's going to be some additional cost here, some pipe upgrading along the way and everything. That's going to be having to take place, about $13 million I heard on it. I really like some of the way you were going on that. We're going to get the developer involved. He's going to maybe do some cost sharing and things like that, because where we are with their DCCs and all that kind of thing. Will this have to be, this expenditure, because this is going to be maybe a 10 or 20 year build out, we don't need to do this right now, do we? Will this be able to be done over time? That was one of my questions I had here as I thought about, could we do, we can do it over time, is I guess what I'm asking, right? There's no rush to get this done tomorrow to accommodate this development, is that right?
Thank you, Councillor Luck, through your worship. That's correct, that the infrastructure improvements and even the fire service, if we were looking at a fire hall, adding a second fire hall, those are things that could be brought online over time as the development is brought on. So, if you look at 450 development or housing units and spread that over 20 years, you're looking at roughly around 25 a year. So that 25 a year wouldn't, for the first few years, that wouldn't necessitate sanitary upgrades. But certainly as time progressed, those upgrades would need to be brought online. So to answer your question in short, yes, the infrastructure upgrades could be brought in over time, and there are certain aspects or segments of the sanitary, especially the sanitary pipe, where we currently have older pipes or pipes that are needing to be replaced, and so those would likely come prior to other areas. And I think Mr. Smith has brought up a map here on his computer, so he probably wants to talk through that a little bit more, but
Okay.
yeah, I'll turn it over to him.
Excellent.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think this is really important so that council and the public understand a little bit more of the background for how kind of the whole infrastructure or servicing side is met. So in 2012 was the last time the sanitary sewer utility master plan was updated, and at that time, all the way back in 2012, they were very actively looking at this question for what sewer infrastructure would need to be upgraded throughout the entire community with exit 286 and without exit 286. And so there are a number of different maps, two of which Don included in the report, which you can find at page 14 on the agenda if anyone has questions, but there are other more detailed maps that answer different questions as well. And so the short of it is there's a series that looks at if the city of Merritt were to grow and develop at projected growth rates without exit 286, there would still be significant infrastructure upgrades that are required. And so what we want to make sure is clear, despite the fact there is a total of 13 point some odd million dollars worth of upgrades that would be required along this line, approximately 8 point some odd million of that would be required without exit 286 as a result of the normal development of the city of Merritt. And so we do want to be very clear what the expectation is that this developer would ultimately be paying for through development cost charges and as well as cost sharing. It isn't an expectation that they're going to pay for everything that the city of Merritt is ever going to require. It's only for the things that are expressly wouldn't otherwise be required unless it were for this development. And those upgrades will also be benefiting other areas as well, because like you say, the line ends up becoming a main artery that runs through the entirety of the community that will expand capacity so that ideally, we aren't going to need to come in and change these pipe diameters. You're going to do it once, you're going to do it right, up to a certain diameter. And then, of course, you still have depreciation of the asset over time, but you're replacing not because of insufficient diameter, you're replacing because of age, is what we're aiming for with the entirety of this project. And to go to Councillor White's comment as well, ultimately you have to make sure you can get the effluent there, but then you have to make sure your processing capacity is sufficient as well. And so that's part of what that utility master plan considers, but less than what we would do in the very focused wastewater treatment plan, master plan that we're creating right now, which is going to address how we can expand our production capacity up to the kind of final build-out population of the city of Merritt. So I hope that answers the question for how we utilize the plans to be able to set out what pipe diameters are going to be required where and how the costs are going to be attributed.
Did you have a further question to that?
Follow up.
Well, you're it. You're it.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Mr. Smith, because it's really important, because it doesn't matter how many times we repeat this out into the public, there seems to be a lack of confidence in our staff and this council in providing the information that we have on the sewer treatment plant, the pipe work, the water system, and we constantly get bombarded that. I just want to let you know that I have full confidence in our staff and our engineers and even our consultants that bring this information. That's what they do. And so I'm going to put a challenge out right now to anybody in this community. If they're upset with our numbers and our work, they're more than happy to see them hire an engineer and come up with their own numbers, because quite frankly, we've got to put our confidence in something in this community. And right now I'm putting it in my staff and in our engineers and developers. They know this is what they do. The last thing I want to hear is somebody that's a baker or something telling us that we're wrong about our numbers. And I just got a little bit of passion about this right now, because it never ends in this community, and I'm very, very sad about that. So I'm going to put a challenge out there. If the numbers are wrong, you feel the numbers are wrong, somebody out there, please come and challenge us, but bring us the facts. No more innuendo, no more guessing, no more this. We need to have the numbers. So I'm telling you right now, you've got my full confidence in what's going on here in this community with the staff and the engineers and our public works in this. We have to have confidence and faith in something, and that's where I'm putting my faith and confidence at the moment. And unless somebody else can prove us wrong some other way. But thank you very much, staff, for doing this and bringing these numbers to light for us. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Somehow it wasn't a question, but I didn't stop it.
Well, I had a question. But I had it,
Councillor White.
The water, again, is another one that has come up for me with this project. And I don't know, explain what everybody's explained to me, and I get it now. Actually, since the last letter that Sean put out, I understand it. But when I explain it and explain the Coldwater River thing, then they say to me, well, then obviously we don't have enough water if we're draining the Coldwater River. So that one I don't know how to answer, and I don't know. I don't really know what more can be done to explain the water.
Mr. Smith.
I feel like more than anything I want to create some like high school diorama that is going to show this, but the easiest way I can explain it is if you, and you guys have seen it in some of the other presentations that I've made, but we have a stable aquifer in the upper Merritt aquifer. We also have the middle and lower aquifers. Middle doesn't have anything in it. Lower has a Kengard well, which has a 50 liter per second pumping capacity, but could be widely expanded. So the first point is we absolutely have sufficient water, but we acknowledge that depending on future growth requirements, there may be additional costs in accessing water. It's not saying that we can continuously use water forever with our existing infrastructure. There is a chance that we are going to need to expand infrastructure, particularly if we can't find a resolution to what I see as a corollary issue with the Coldwater River. Not to say that they aren't connected, because anybody that claims otherwise is crazy, that all these water systems are connected, but we have significant water under here, we don't have enough water over here, and this over here where we don't have enough water ultimately feeds that. So when we use lots of water from our reservoir system, it draws, and the Coldwater River ultimately feeds our aquifer system, and it creates a stressful situation for the Coldwater River. Has impacts on fish habitat and water temperatures, etc. And so I am fully with you that it is a confusing concept to say we have lots of water to draw from for drinking water. That being said, we implement watering restrictions to minimize our impact on the Coldwater River. I understand that is a conceptually challenging issue. It's not every time I say it, I get blank, puzzled looks and saying, yeah, no, Sean, that doesn't make sense. You still have us on water restrictions. We don't have enough water. I understand why the residents are confused, why they feel frustrated, why they feel scared. All we can say is you will always have water to turn on your taps, to drink water, to go to the bathroom. That is not at risk. It has never been at risk. The city has historically used far more water than we're currently using, and we did it just fine. What is different now is we are far more environmentally conscious about the fact that we have impacts on the Coldwater River, and it is struggling. We need to acknowledge that, that we have a relationship with the land that, quite frankly, First Nations have known and understood for a very long time, and I think that we need to work to become better environmental stewards, and that's why we're encouraging not to use so much water to promote and protect the resource that we have. But there's water there for every one of your uses. We're just asking people.
And in that request not to use water, we have never once asked the citizens to cut down on showers or inside water use at any time whatsoever. It is strictly the outdoor use that we're asking to curtail. Councillor Fair.
If I may, I'd like to make another water comment.
No question.
I just want to be direct about the concept of, I'm not a homeowner and I'm not someone who has a green front or back lawn, but my understanding is the amount of water we use to keep those lawns green is massive, and you know, this may just be that we have to accept for evermore that we have to limit our use of water by letting our lawns go green or brown. And I think our community doesn't want to accept that, but for a certain period of the year, that's just the way it has to be.
Thank you. So I think we've exhausted the questions to staff. Now, we are looking at needing a motion so we can debate. And I'm going to give Councillor White the option to start, and you had a mover that council received this, no, that directs staff to provide additional information
Yeah.
and defer third reading to a future date. Do you have a future date in mind?
No, just whatever's,
Defer, do we need a future date, or do we? I think we do.
Yes.
So pick a date.
next meeting, or
Okay. And is any,
is that enough?
we don't have a seconder yet, but let's, do we have a seconder? Okay, we don't have a seconder. Mr. Smith,
Yep, you can ignore my
you can't
comment.
second.
It was dependent on whether it was going to get seconded, but ultimately the question was around the scope of what was expected so that we actually had time as staff to prepare whatever it was you were asking for.
That
So-
would have been in questions, but we didn't get a seconder, so thank you.
Sorry, Mayor, just a question around.
Well, question around,
Yeah, I'm having a problem seconding it. I think that's, I'm just very fuzzy on what staff is going to bring back. We need
Well,
to
I
be a
think
lot
that-
more
well-
clear what we're asking staff
well-
here for, right?
okay.
Yeah.
Part of the issue was, that's what a seconder would have done, is given us that ability to debate that issue. So it isn't an issue because there wasn't a seconder. Are we clear on that? Okay. So now,
All right.
now I need to have somebody either give third reading to the official community plan amendment bylaw, number 2310-2021.
So moved. Second.
Okay. And anyone want to speak to this one? This is the official community plan portion of changing it to a CD1. No?
Comprehensive residential commercial. And removing the 3-story reference.
CD. Okay. As he said, comprehensive development. No?
Comprehensive, to change the land use designation to comprehensive residential commercial, and also to remove the reference to 3 stories in the OCP.
Thank you. That's part of the OCP. Do we have anyone to speak to
Is that
that?
motion we're working on, right?
That's the first one. It's not an and, I've split them.
Yeah.
So the OCP first, and nobody's going to speak to this, so all in favor? Opposed? Carried. And that council give third reading to zoning amendment bylaw, number 2311-2021. Okay, Luck and Etchart. Anyone want to speak to this one? This is the zoning amendment. This is the bigger one. We did a lot of our questions to staff earlier with no debate. Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, and I've lost my old place. Give me a moment here. Okay, so that is, now we go on to new business, 9.1 UBCM calls, and this is a verbal report from Mr. Lois.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was feeling so proud of myself back in January when I put together a forward plan for the Corporate Services Department, and I pulled this forward 6 weeks compared to last year. I thought that would give you plenty of time. UBCM then managed to completely undercut me by pulling forward their deadline 6 weeks, so we're on the same schedule as always. So we've had the booklet distributed to us with all the lists of ministries, and that was sent to all of you by email as well. I was hoping that you'd have a chance to read those and come up with some ideas for calls. I was also hoping that I would come up with some ideas for calls to propose to you. I think the most obvious ones to make are, so we've last year we weren't able to speak to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. This year you've already moved and attempted to get through SILGA and successfully did in one instance snow clearing issues, one around the snow clearing standards on arterial highways, one on permitting use of all-terrain vehicles on city streets for snow clearing only. So it seems to me that since those are passed unanimously, you would probably want to request a call discussing those two issues, and I presume there are other roadie issues as well you would like to bring forward. As a general rule, you always want to talk to the Premier. There are a number of things in there, although we actually have a closed session tonight where some of them might be more appropriate to discuss. So I was wondering if any of you had had any opportunity to come up with any particular ministries that you wanted to speak to with any specific asks that you wanted to make of them. And if not, then there will be a second report on this issue on the June 22nd meeting. The deadline to get in any requests is June 30th. So we do still have time to think about this if you haven't thought about anything yet. But the next council meeting, we need to have the list of what you would like to discuss with whom.
And we do need to add continuing care to that list for the 20 complex care beds that have essentially left our community.
Care beds, yep.
And I believe policing, Solicitor General. I can't even remember what we spoke about last year, so.
Last year with the Solicitor General, you spoke about things like the courthouse, and as well with the Attorney General. With the Ministry of, I think Mr. Smith has a much better recollection of these than I do.
Yeah, Solicitor General last time around was potentially looking at the joint courthouse police facility. I think Solicitor General, one topic to discuss is again the use of municipal resources outside of municipal boundaries. I think that given the last report that was made at the Public Police Committee meeting in particular, talking and really petitioning for additional policing resources coming from the province to be able to balance out what the municipality is providing is going to be one critical issue with the Solicitor General. Ultimately, Your Worship and Council, we do have some ideas and suggestions, but we know and we've heard from Council previously that short of this, we want you to tell us what you want, what's important to you, what you're hearing from residents in the community. And on the 22nd, we are happy to kind of fill in the gaps with what we think is also a critical issue to make sure that you're not going to miss any opportunities to speak with these individuals. But really, it's just flagging it for you that please think about and bring these forward so that we can make sure that the issues that are important for Council to address are brought forward.
Okay, so the discussion is not tonight.
Unless you have specific suggestions.
We have no suggestions at this point. We need to think about it.
Okay. We can email you.
We'll get back to you.
Thanks.
Are there any notices of motion? Councillor Fair.
I would like to make the following notice of motion that Council of the City of Merritt direct staff to research and propose an appropriate land acknowledgement to be used at council meetings.
Okay, and any other notice of motion? And you will give Mr. Lois that in writing, thank you. And any other? Nope, seeing none. Reports from council. Councillor Christopherson.
I just want us to be able to recognize the impact of the confirmation of the unmarked grave sites at the Kamloops Residential School and to stand with our community and hoping that healing can take place, along with the recognition that things haven't always been what some of us thought. So our hearts and prayers are with the people of the Valley.
Thank you, and I actually, it slipped my mind. I would like to ask us, just as a group, to just take a minute of silence in order to just recognize the significance in this community of that event. Thank you. Other reports from council? I have an announcement to make. Two actually. One of them on behalf of Councillor Luck, who has been appointed to the elected to the Silga board as a director at large. And for 1 year, right? This is an annual appointment. Annual election. And I have been appointed to the UBCM RCMP Labor Management Contract Committee for a 3-year term. If I said elected, that's not true. I've been appointed. Did I say elected? Anyways.
No.
So other reports from council. That's it. Okay. Information items. There's 2 on here. Does anyone want to discuss either one? Seeing nobody jumping in, I'm just going to move to a closed session, and that the meeting be closed to the press and public under section 91E of the Community Charter. The acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements, if the council considers that disclosure could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality. So we move into closed session, but I would like to take a... Pardon?
You need to move second and vote on that if you would.
Moot. Thank you. Moved by Luck, seconded by Fair, and all in favor? Opposed? None. Carried. So, and we'll take a 5-minute